Laying model railroad track used to be one of those things that kind of intimidated me about the hobby, because if you get it wrong, your whole layout is messed up. But now it doesn't, and I'm going to show you how I lay track. Let's get to it. Before we begin, let's take a look at the track plan for MRR2. This is an HO scale switching layout. Now the difference between this and what people would consider a normal layout is this layout is really designed to do switching operations and not much else. No continuous running, nothing like that. So what I have here are 3 industries, 2 oriented one direction and 1 oriented the other. We also have a runaround track, and then we have tracks that go to the edge, including one where I'm going to attach some type of track cassette so that the train can come in and pull cars. And it's also, if I ever decide to build an extension or a larger HO scale layout, I'll be able to attach this to it pretty easily. All right, let's get into laying track. All right, so we have all of our track and we have our buildings that are going to be necessary for placing the track right here. These are just a couple of kits I assembled. So the first thing that I need to do is I'm going to put together the track in the rough plan. Now, to be clear, this is not the installation of the track. This is where I need to plot out where the track is going. If you have a really large layout, you can also do things like using rulers for radii and things like that. You can also, a lot of software has features where you can print out the entire layout one-to-one and then lay your track out and mark where it needs to go. But this layout is so small that I can just take all of the track and just put it in place and then mark where I'm going to need to put down the Cork roadbed. And we'll get to that in a little bit. Now the reason I have these buildings here is so that I can make sure that I get the track exactly where I need to go. On a layout as narrow as this, your spacing and precision of your placement of items is key. So I made sure to at least build the kits enough to where I could use them for placement. You can tell that my building front right there isn't quite done yet, but I built it enough to where I'm going to be able to see where it needs to go. So we're going to do that. Then I'm going to take the flex track and everything and put it in place and make sure that everything fits properly. I'm using another piece of flex track just to be the piece that extends off the layout. Now, if you're new to the hobby, you may not know what flex track is. It's a pretty awesome product, especially if you're doing really custom track work. This is a piece of flex track. It's about 3 feet long, and basically what it is that it can flex and turn to a certain degree so you can get the right angles and curves and everything. And the way it works is, one feature of it is that it has one rail that is rigid and stays in place and one rail that slides as you bend it. And you can see this one right here on the downside of this from this angle that moves and slides. Now that rail you always want to be on the inside of your curve, otherwise you wouldn't have enough to connect to other pieces. Now the way it does this is one side is completely solid in terms of the webbing with the ties right here, and then the other side is broken up. You can see that the webbing has gaps in it, and that is how it allows itself to flex. Now, because FlexTrack is a product for customization, you will need to do some modifications to connect it to track. Now, the big thing you have to do is cut the 1 or 2 ties. I like to cut the first 2 ties at the edge off right here, and you only need to cut where the webbing is solid. So I'm just going to cut this right here, and then you slide it off, just exposing the bare rail, but don't get rid of those 2 ties. You're going to use it later on you're going to slide it back under it, and that's going to make it look seamless. So you're going to cut off those 2 ties so that you can slide the rails using rail joiners onto other pieces just like this, and then you will be able to connect it to pretty much any other track. Now this piece of flex track right here has a little bit of a curve in order to get back to that building front, and what I'm going to do is, since I'm just using it to mark it, I need something to hold it place while I mark where the location is that I need for the roadbed to go. So I'm grabbing my favorite tool, those 1, 2, 3 blocks, and I'm putting them on here and using them to hold it in place as I mark everything and cut this piece of flex track to size. Now we need to mark where our roadbed is going to go, and to do this I use a pin that I know I can see clearly. So I'm using a blue pin right here, and I'm just going to be marking the middle line of the track all the way down. Now I only do this for sections where it is not a turnout. For turnouts I also mark the edges because that's going to be very helpful. So I'm going to go through marking each spot, and when I get to the turnouts you'll see me draw around the edges as well. So this midline that I'm making right here is essentially going to be something that I do connect the dots with the Cork roadbed. Now the Cork roadbed comes in half. I'll show you that in a little bit, and the reason that I'm putting these dots in the middle will make a lot of sense once you see that. But you can see also here where I have marked where the corner comes apart. This is probably the trickiest part of doing Cork roadbed, is doing the cuts for turnouts, but it's really not that bad, and I'm going to show you guys here in a minute. Now we need to cut the pieces of flex track, and the thing that we're going to use for that is a set of track cutters. I'll link some in the description below, but basically these have a flush and a non-flush cut side to them, and you can see right here you want to use that flush side on the part of the track that you're going to be keeping on the layout. That way you don't have a little pinch. So basically what you do is you go straight down the rail with these and you just cut, and they work extremely well. They just like snap right through it, and they don't leave that pinch, which could lead to some issues down the road, as long as you're pointing the flush side towards the track that you want to keep on the layout. Now I can remove all of the track off the layout because it is time to start laying some roadbed. You can see all of my marks here. They may not show the best up on camera, but they look great in person. And you can see how I have a pretty clear outline of where my roadbed needs to go. So let's grab some Cork roadbed. This is from Midwest Products. This is HO scale Cork roadbed. I don't need this much. This is 25 pieces, but I couldn't find any smaller amounts right now. So I've got plenty of extra roadbed. So the way that this stuff comes is it comes in a strip that has a terrible section. And the terrible part has an angle, which is going to be the angle of the slope of the edge of your roadbed where you put your ballast on it. And what you do is you just tear apart down this middle line. It comes apart extremely easy. It leaves a little bit of an edge. We'll deal with that later. But what we're going to do now is basically you flip them, and then the angled edges go on the outside and the perfectly square edges go on the middle. And you just line them up on that middle dot, and you do that, connect the dots with the outline that you just drew. This is what you need to put this stuff in place. You're going to need some sort of adhesive. You can use latex caulk if you have plenty of time to let it dry. I'm going to be using Loctite Power Grip. This stuff takes a while to cure, but it'll dry fairly fast. You're also going to need some sort of box cutter or utility knife and some push pins to hold it in place while it dries. This Loctite Power Grip all-purpose works really great. We're going to be using a lot of this in this project. So to begin, let's go ahead and start tearing up our strips of cork and laying them down along those middle lines. And here's a quick demonstration of what I was talking about, of how the angled edge goes on the outside and the perfectly square edges go on the middle. That's what it'll look like right there. Now it's time to start gluing the track down, and I put down a bead of that Loctite Power Grip, and here it goes. And what I'm doing is basically putting it right near the edge of the dots. Remember, when we're gluing each side of the roadbed down, so I don't put it down the middle because I don't want it to not fully get one piece or the other. So I put it just off center so that I can lay that one piece down. Then I'll just lay my piece of half roadbed in place. And one thing about this that you're going to see me doing is I'm doing the outermost of the roadbed first. And you'll also see that I'm smoothing it out here. One great tool for smoothing out is those 1, 2, 3 blocks. They work great for smoothing this kind of thing out. But you want to do working outside in because it makes it a lot easier, and you'll see why in a minute. You can see me using that 1, 2, 3 block to smooth it out right there. But working your way outside in with your cork roadbed rather than just going down the line is going to make things a lot easier for you. So if you have a lot of turnouts right here, work your way outside in. And then I'm just going to take my push pins and I'm going to put 4 or 5 in this particular piece just to hold it in place until it dries. Obviously those aren't going to stay in place because you can't put track on it with the push pins in place. So this will be there just to let it dry. This is a lot of rinse and repeat when you're putting this down, but again, you can see that I'm doing that outside line first, and this is going to give you a good guide of where you can put your cork roadbed when you have to start cutting it in some angles to be able to do your turnouts, and we're going to get to that here in just a second. Now it's time to do the first turnout. I'm going to be doing this one right here. And the initial part of it, we're going to be doing the outside edge of the turnout rather than the inside. So we're going to go ahead and start where we did with the very first piece and then cut around and then follow the divergent route on the outside of the turnout. Again, this is just a lot of rinse and repeat. We're starting on the outside of the other side now that the roadbed is starting to come over from that first turnout. And this side actually has a siding on it, this line will, so we'll have to cut our roadbed and you just use a utility knife for that right where you need it to. Now for the inside portion of the turnout. The way that I do this is I take a piece of cork roadbed and I will line it up right with where the merge point is with the turnout. So I need to put this right here, and then I will take my utility knife and just cut right along that line. Now, it is cork, so you may have some breakup happen with this kind of precision cut. Don't worry about it. You can always just glue it in and push it back together like a puzzle piece. But I just basically use the line that I've already made with the outer edge as a guide, and I cut it right away and just cut it right down that line. I like to line up the far corner. You can see right there with right where the edge point is, and that's going to make it really easy to know where to cut. Once you have your fit, the rest of the process is identical. You're just going to take your glue and make a bead and then push it down and put the push pins in place to hold it in place. And then it is just a rinse and repeat process with everyone. You use that same technique to get the angles on every turnout section, and it works great. It's a very simple technique and it works very well. Again, you may have some pieces fall off that aren't perfect. You can also use any of the cork. You can see I have some scrap that has fallen off a little bit right there. You can use some of that to fill in the gaps. You just want to make sure that you get everything nice and level. And if it isn't perfectly level, you can also take a piece of sandpaper or a sanding block to it, and you can sand it out nice and level as well. Now, once you have everything cut and push pinned in place and you're leaving it to dry, you want to leave it and let it dry overnight. I'll always follow that rule of when in doubt, let it dry overnight. And when you come back, you'll have a nice solid roadbed ready to go and lay some track. All right, it's the next day and we're gonna go ahead and pull all of our pins out, and we're actually going to start putting the track on here. Now, I'm doing this for a different reason than you might think. I need to drill some holes for some things that are very important to have drilled before any track gets glued down. To understand what holes we need to drill, we need to take a look at a turnout. This is the turnouts we are using. The first thing I need to say is that we're using under table mounted switch machines to throw these switches. I will not be doing any manual throws like caboose throws or anything like that. I'm going to be using tortoise switch motors, and there needs to be a 1/4 of an inch hole for the control rod to come up and be able to throw the turnout one way or the other. The other hole that needs to be drilled in advance is a hole for a power feeder for the frog of the turnout. Now, what is the frog? That's the little part right here on the inner rails of the turnout where the trim diverges right here. You may be able to see this tiny little piece of plastic on each side, and that basically electrically isolates the frog. Now, we need some power to go to that because it is a potential stall point for our railroad. So we're going to drill a hole for power to come to that frog. Now, there is some complications with the frog that we'll need to address, but I'm actually going to do that in a whole nother video. But these are the two holes that we need to drill. So I basically mark the holes. I'm using the push pins to mark them, and then I'm going to drill the holes, and then I can attach the track. So I need to get the holes drilled for all 5 of the turnouts, and then I can start putting down the track. And this is just more rinse and repeat. I got to do it for the other 4 turnouts. Now, if you're doing manual throws like caboose throws, you don't obviously need to drill the hole for the under table switch machine. But I do recommend that you do have some sort of device controlling your throws rather than just flicking it by hand, because these are Atlas number 4 turnouts and they don't have any sort of spring-loaded action. They need something to hold them in place, so you may have some pain in the butt derailments if you don't have something like a caboose throw, or in my case, the tortoise switch machines, something to hold them in place when they throw to a certain position. All right, now there's one last thing that we need to do before we can start gluing track to our road bed. Now, if you look closely at the edge of the road bed, you can see where we tore it apart. There's still a little bit of a lip and an edge that's going to be a pain when we go to ballast our track. So we need to smooth out the angle that the road bed slopes down to, that's going to do in real world to have runoff and things like that. But we need to get rid of this edge. So what I did was I just took some sandpaper and folded it up, and you can see you just kind of run it across, and it's not that difficult to sand. It's just one of those tedious processes, but trust me, you're going to want to do this with your Cork road bed. Get those edges nice and smooth so that when you ballast, your ballast looks really, really good. This is one big thing. Now, you don't have to use sandpaper. You can use sanding block. As long as you can get that edge nice and smooth and looking great, that's all you got to do. Now it's finally time to glue the track down, and I'm using the power grip again. Some people nail their track down, that's totally fine, but I prefer gluing the track just to get, I don't like the look of the little pinhead nails in there. So what I do is I do my little bead of glue, and then I flatten it out smooth, and what I will do is basically just run it as much as I can. You'll notice that I'm avoiding the areas where the turnout points are, where they move. I'm also avoiding the hole where the control rod for the turnout motor is going to come through, and I'm also avoiding the hole where the wire is going to come through for the frog. But I go ahead and press that into the glue when it's nice and flat, and then I'm going to bring some push pins and just push it down along the rails, and that will hold it until it dries. And then it's just more rinse and repeat until you get everything nice and glued down. Like I said, the thing you just want to avoid is the parts where the turnout points are going to be moving, and you also want to avoid those holes that you just drilled. The only thing that is slightly more complex is when you're gluing down a flex track that has a little bit of a curve in it. Now, you're gonna see me put this in here. Now, normally it just doesn't matter where you push pin it, you're just going to be going down the line. For a curved flex track, what I like to do is do the push pins that hold the curves first. I start off with the beginning and the end of the curve, and then I also put one at the middle so that I can hold it on that perfect angle, and this will just make it a lot easier to help dry in place and position as well. But after you get that curve down pat, you will have no problem putting the rest of the push pins in. Again, it's only barely more complicated than doing a regular track. Last thing, hey, remember those ties that we saved that we cut off? You just want to take them and slide them in place, and then your turnouts where your flex track is are going to look pretty seamless right there. So you just want to do that. You may need to put a little bit of glue on them. I had to do that for one of them, but once you push those in place, you'll never really be able to tell the difference. Now just leave that overnight to dry. And here is the completed track work. Obviously I haven't done any wiring and there's still a lot more electrical work to do, but it's a good start. Laying track is arguably the most important part of building a model railroad, but it doesn't have to be the scariest. As long as you take your time and make sure that you get everything right, don't be in a rush, and you'll have a great running model railroad. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Jimmy from the DIY and Digital. Stay safe, be kind, and happy railroading.